Hello, everyone. It's Mega Champ again. No controversy this time. One can only hope that I'm done with that sort of thing for the rest of the year. Or, at minimum, at least, for a while. You know, unless something else happens that bothers me so much so that it makes me feel better to talk about it and rant about it and shoot about it, or, whatever wording you want to use. None of that. We're back to normal, hopefully for the foreseeable future. Again, unless something happens that bothers me too much. But until that happens, it's time for another Full Thoughts video. I do kind of still feel a little annoyed, but I'll try not to, let it affect me all that too much. It's hard not to be, but, it is what it is, I suppose. So just bear with me, I guess. But I did finish another game, and, I guess I can do it whenever I want, obviously, but I've always been the type to want to get things done and over with. So it's time for another Full Thoughts video since I have once again finished another game. In this case, Kirby and the Forgotten Land for the Nintendo Switch. As always with my other Full Thoughts videos, and as is normal with all of the other Full Thoughts videos, I will be briefly going over the story of the game, the characters of the game, the world where the game takes place, the graphics of the game, and of course the gameplay. And I will also I will try to not talk about as many spoilers as possible, or for this to be as spoiler free as possible. I'll try my best. Sometimes I have to, sometimes I can do it, but I will definitely try my best. If I do have to talk about a spoiler, you will get a warning because, you deserve a warning if you talk about a spoiler. So, as always, as per normal, this is just my personal opinion, feelings, thoughts, and experiences on this particular game. And everyone's thoughts, feelings, experiences, and opinions are going to be different at the end of the day. You can have your opinion, everyone can have their opinion, so I can have my opinion. Have you noticed I haven't said never mind. There's no point in me even saying that because we all know how this goes at this point. So, not much else for me to say. So let's just go ahead and get started. Kirby and the Forgotten Land is for the Nintendo Switch, obviously. It's only on the Nintendo Switch, so that's really the only way you play it unless you want to, use one of those more scrupulous methods, which, again, I'm not going to say one way or the other on. But it was released on March 25th, 2022. So I'm still more than 2 years behind, but not necessarily a bad thing. Well, it isn't, but. So, the story, to be honest, when it comes to the Kirby franchise, stuff like the story and the characters, and maybe even the world to an extent, although maybe not so much that last one, but definitely the stories and the story and the characters. The Kirby franchise, like other platforming franchises, like Spyro and Crash, and even Mario to an extent. I don't play the Mario games, but I'm just saying. The story and the characters don't really matter all that much in platformers because it's more about the gameplay and stuff. Again, like I have stated before, some platformers do have good stories, but for the most part, at least if you ask me, and this is obviously just my personal opinion and thought on the matter, for me, the Kirby franchise has never really been about the story. Some do have good stories, I'm not going to act like they don't. But the Kirby franchise has been more about the gameplay, which is what platformers more revolve around or are more involved in. Although I will admit that the Kirby franchise, as opposed to other platforming franchises, does at least try a little bit harder, if you want to put it that way, when it comes to the characters in the game, because there's always a new set of characters that they want you to get invested in. But I would say for the most part, the story of the Kirby games in the franchise don't really matter all that much. And mostly they are relatively the same in the Kirby games and the Kirby franchise. And this is definitely the case in Kirby and the Forgotten Land. There's a pretty much warp or black hole. Well, it's kind of a combination between a warp and a black hole. Shows up, pulls Kirby and Bandana Waddle Dee into it, and the Waddle Dees in general, and other Kirby characters that I won't say that you are going to encounter if you play the game for yourself, because it's technically a spoiler. But pretty much your normal Kirby characters that show up in most of the Kirby games and most of the Kirby franchise, mostly, they are there as well. So the warp slash black hole interdimensional portal shows up and sucks Kirby, Bandana, Waddle Dee, and the Waddle Dees into it. And there's your story. I wish that was a joke, and I'm kidding, but I'm really not. It's hard to kind of see on this image, but the enemies of the game are mostly animal slash beast like type of enemies and characters. This is basically the Waddle Dee of the game, a Woofy, and there are like snakes and bison and alligators and stuff like that. So those are basically the enemies of the game. So I guess animals do exist in the Kirby franchise, although... Well, actually, I don't really know if Waddle Dees are animals or not. I don't really delve all that deeply into Kirby lore, quote unquote, if that even exists. I mean, yes, it does, but you can practically ignore all of it, pretty much. So, I guess animals do exist in the Kirby universe, in the Kirby franchise, because that was mostly the enemies in this game, other than the other enemies that you can, like you do in other Kirby games, what a shock, suck up and get copy abilities for. So yeah, you get sucked up and put into this apocalyptic or abandoned place, Forgotten Land. It's literally called Forgotten Land. That's what they call the name of it, or at least one of the final bosses does. So that's what I'm assuming it's called. They call it This Forgotten Land. So I don't really think they ever give a title or give a name to the place that you're put in, that Kirby gets sucked into and put in. But I suppose that's not really important. Through the story, you rescue a little cutesy animal that becomes your partner slash support character named Elfilin, who is not in this image, but it's hard for me to describe Elfilin. So I guess we'll do this real quick. Let's see. Yeah, there's Elfilin. So you encounter that character and partner. Obviously, when it comes to Kirby games and the Kirby franchise, your first instinct is to think that it's the true villain of the game. You're wrong, and that's all I'm going to say about that. It's not even that much of a spoiler, but yeah, you encounter that character who is trying to be captured and was captured, and you rescue them, and they are capturing they are capturing and have captured the Waddle Dees for some reason, which is actually never explained. I have no idea why they were trying to capture them, but I suppose that's not really important. The point of the game is to rescue all of the Waddle Dees and to help Elfalin with dealing with the Beast Pack. So there's your story for the most part. Um, is the story good? I I mean, it's definitely one of the more unique stories, I suppose, when it comes to the Kirby games and the Kirby franchise, but considering that most of the time in the Kirby games and the Kirby franchise, you literally get sucked into some different kind of world or have to go out in space and to explore different planets and that sort of stuff, or you get invaded or or pop star and other planets get invaded. It's not really all that different from other Kirby game stories. I'm sorry, that's just how I personally feel about it. Like I said, Kirby games and platformers aren't really about the story. There's really nothing else for me to say. I mean, it's not that I hated the story, it was fine. It just wasn't really all that different from most of the other stories in Kirby games. Sorry. I'm not saying this, that it's a negative. It just wasn't anything that stuck out. But that's not really the point of, platformers or Kirby games. But, yeah. Nothing much to really say about the characters. The two most important characters, other than some bosses later in the game that you take on and fight that become important in post game. Yes, I played post game. Don't have a heart attack. But mostly the most important characters are obviously Kirby and Elfalin. I mean, Bandana Waddle Dee is sort of there, but he only exists if you play co-op. I played single player. There you go. Characters are not all that important. Elfalin and the Beast Pack are the new sort of characters, quote unquote, in this game that they want you to get invested in. Although, since they're enemies for the most part, or practically for the entire game, I can't really get invested in enemies. I'm sorry, I just can't. They did do some unique things with them in post game. I'm not going to pretend they didn't. They did. But for the most part, the characters were fine. In terms of character development, I would say they actually did do pretty decent character development with the important, quote unquote, characters of the game, that being Elfalin, one of and two of the bosses. It was actually surprisingly good, and I'm not saying they don't do good character development in other Kirby games, but they're kind of just there. And you either defeat them or you defeat them and somehow that means you befriend them. Do you see what I'm trying to point out here? You're not really supposed to question things all that much, or you're not supposed to try to use logical reasoning to figure things out for the most part. Mostly. They're just kind of there, and you just accept them, and that's what the game wants you to do. Which is fine in this particular case, because it is kind of an exception, because it's more about the platforming and the gameplay as opposed to anything else. But what I will say, without trying to give too many spoilers, is that the character development that they did for Elflin was actually pretty good. There is technically a twist, but it's not a twist that you might think. It was actually a decent twist as opposed to what most of the other twists are, which, you know, is they turn out to be the true villain. That's not what happens in this particular case, but it's a twist nonetheless, which I thought was actually fairly decent and fairly good. Two of the other bosses do become important later in post-game. Decent-ish character development with them as well, I guess, if you want to put it that way. But you do have to play post-game in order to get it, so that can be either hit or miss. I was invested enough, and I did have an incentive to play post-game in this particular instance and case. Not everyone is going to have that sort of incentive and investment, depending on who it is, but if you want to see the character development for two of the bosses, I would suggest you play post-game. Just prepare yourself. That's all I'm going to say about that. So the characters were fine. It's not like I hated them or disliked them or that they were forgettable. Maybe a little bit on the forgettable side because some of the more important ones were enemies, like I said, and I can't really bring myself to care all that much about the enemies, but the characters were fine. They did what they could with them in the time they were given, and they did fairly decently, I would say, in the time they were given, so... But again, platforming franchises, the Kirby franchise, not really. They do try to do a little bit more about characters. I mean, it's kind of been a thing for a while now, so I guess they kind of have to. And I do give them credit and props for that, but still, for the most part, you can practically ignore the characters if you want and still enjoy your experience. But in this particular case, the characters were pretty decent mostly, and they did pretty decently with the character development. But if you want to ignore that, you can, but that's up to you. The world of the game, the Forgotten Land, we're gonna just call it that since I don't know its official quote unquote name. And I don't think it was ever given an official name. So we're just gonna call it the Forgotten Land. It was actually a pretty decent world, and that was because of the next thing we're gonna talk about, graphics. A lot of people like to say that the world of Kirby and the Forgotten Land is kind of apocalyptic. And you can kind of see it in this picture with the grass covering the large buildings and stuff. When games do that, it is pretty decent. I'm not going to pretend that it's not. However, at the same time, you can make the argument that apocalyptic settings are overdone or done way too much. And that is also true and also the case. But considering the fact that in some franchises they don't touch on that subject and try to actively stay away from it, I can honestly forgive it in this particular instance and let it slide because it was actually really good and really colorful and really decent for the most part. So, in this particular case and for this particular game, and as I have said several times already, in my broken record nature, every situation in every game is going to be different. But for the purposes of this particular game, I actually did like it. I'm not going to lie. I did like it. It was actually very well done, and I enjoyed it, and I thought it was a very unique setting that they have not touched on in the Kirby franchise. At least not as a general theme of the entire world and the entire game. So, I liked it. I'm not going to lie. I'm going to be brutally honest with you. I liked it. I did. But like I said, every situation is different. And I'm sure there is someone out there who is going to go like, oh, they got to stop doing apocalyptic settings. You are correct. They should. But you have to treat every situation in every game differently. But for me personally, in this particular case and in this particular game, I liked it. I did. And I'm not going to pretend I didn't. The mouthful stuff was probably the funniest. Well, actually, I should save that for later. Sorry. But yeah, I did like the world of the game. I was getting ahead of myself there. The graphics of the game, yeah, I'm gonna be brutally honest. The graphics of Kirby and the Forgotten Land is probably the best graphics of a Kirby game in the entire franchise. And this is coming from the person who says I'm not an expert, because I'm not on graphics and gameplay. But it was the best graphics I think I've ever seen in a Kirby game, because it was a 3D Kirby game. And it fit. It's not like somehow this didn't match with this. They actually did a really good job still trying to match the art style that Kirby tends to and normally has. If it didn't match the art style, then yeah, it'd be a problem and I'd call it out. And it should be called out, like I've also stated several times already. But they actually had it match the art style. That is A plus props from me. I'm not saying the 2D games aren't good. They are. But God, the graphics in this game were so goddamn good. There's no other way for me to put it. I'm sorry. The best graphics I've probably seen in the entire Kirby franchise. And it's on the Switch 1, which is extremely outdated at this point in terms of technology. So that's saying something. That's saying something. Graphics don't make a game, as we have discussed previously with Biomutant, and even Tales of Arise to an extent. Although that goes along with art style, but not the point. Let's not rant about that again. Seriously. The point is, for me personally, the graphics of Kirby and the Forgotten Land are the best in the entire franchise. I'm sorry. That's just how I feel. You're going to get different thoughts from different people. But for me personally, the best graphics of the entire franchise. I'm sorry. So, this is where gameplay comes into view. And if you have noticed yet, or even if you haven't, I guess, I haven't said anything negative yet. I'm about to. But we'll get the positive out of the way first. The gameplay of the game is very fun. It's just like every Kirby game, except in 3D. And good God, man, that 3D. Good God. So good. So good. So good. I can't praise it more. The only thing I will say is that there wasn't really a lot of new, quote-unquote, abilities in this Kirby game. There was only 2 new abilities. Ranger with a gun. Yes, Kirby has an ability with a gun. And drill, which is exactly as it sounds. You dig into the ground and use underground attacks. That was pretty much it for the new abilities. I don't have a list of all of the abilities. I'm sorry. So I'm not going to be able to remember them all. But most of the abilities were very good. And for the first time, maybe ever, Beam was not in a Kirby game. I know, don't have a heart attack. They did not put Beam in a Kirby game. What is this? No, I'm just kidding. Actually, there probably would be is someone out there that would complain about Beam not being in a Kirby game. I don't care. Most of the abilities were very good and very fun, and you can upgrade them. You can upgrade the copy abilities in Kirby game, and in this particular Kirby game. That is fantastic. Please, for the love of God, do that more. We need more upgradable copy abilities, because it can make certain other abilities that much better. It really can. I don't know why they didn't do that before now. I loved the hell out of being able to upgrade copy abilities. Please do that more. Please, I'm begging you, do that more. It probably won't happen in 2D Kirby games in all likelihood, which sucks, but it is what it is, I suppose. But if you are going to do more Kirby games like this, which you should, please continue to have the copy abilities upgradable. Like some other copy abilities that weren't in this game, they could do some unbelievable stuff if you put them in future Kirby games and have them upgradable. For those people who love Beam oh so much and hated that it wasn't in this Kirby game, just think about the possibilities of Beam being in another Kirby game like this where you can upgrade it. And not just that, but, water or leaf or stone or yo-yo, if they ever want to bring that back. Or that Earthbound reference ability, Psychic, whatever you want to call it, PSI. Just think of the possibilities and what they could do if you could upgrade abilities like that. Good God, man. Good God. That's why I'm saying, please do that more. Please do that more. It was so goddamn good in this game. And the upgradable hub town, Waddle Dee town, it was enjoyable. I'm not going to deny that it wasn't. It was. You have to rescue most of the Waddle Dees, which we're going to talk about here in a bit. But I liked the little hub town and how it got upgraded the more Waddle Dees you saved. That was very enjoyable as well. Upgradable hub towns is actually one of the few things of, upgradable stuff that I actually like. As long as you don't have to grind crafting materials, I enjoy it. I do. I'm not going to act like I don't, because I do. I just said I did. That was very enjoyable as well. And there's a fishing mini game in the Waddle Dee town. Oh God, they're adding JRPG mechanics. God save us all. It was enjoyable. Give me a break. So yeah, most of the gameplay, I just said the key word, is very good and very fun. And potentially the best of the franchise. I'm never going to fully say one way or the other on that, which I'll talk about as well here in a bit. But mostly the gameplay is very fun. There's just one problem. And we're done being positive. It's time for my criticism of this Full Thoughts video, and it's time for me to be negative. I'm sorry. It's just one problem. One thing that I could not get past. I'm sorry. Because it bothered me way too goddamn much. I'm sorry. And it ruined my experience for this game. I'm not going to lie to you. This ruined my experience. It did. It did. And I'm not going to pretend that it didn't. Or somehow ignore it when it shouldn't be ignored and it should be called out. One thing bothered me in this game. And that's the missions and the levels. Particularly the missions when you fight the bosses. Though there were some in some of the later stages or levels or whatever you want to call them that were just as bad, if not worse, in some cases. The missions and the levels. To save the Waddle Dees. The missions. Here's the thing with the Kirby franchise. If you ask me, and this is just how I personally feel, okay? It's my full thoughts video. Here's the thing with the Kirby games and the Kirby franchise that I have noticed for a while now, generally speaking. They can't seem to make up their minds. They can't. They can't seem to make up their minds between making it too easy, star allies, and making it too hard, which happened a lot in this particular game with the missions to save the Waddle Dees. They can't seem to make up their mind. And I wish they would. They need to make up their mind. They really do. Make up your mind, for God's sake. Please. Please make up your mind. Because in Kirby Star Allies, it was way too goddamn easy. I'm sorry. All you had to do in Star Allies was get any single one of the guest characters that were, from other franchises. Marks, Susie, Meta Knight, Dark Meta Knight, Magalore, etc., etc., etc. Tyranda, or Tyranda, the thing from Triple Deluxe. It's Tyran something. I'm not looking it up. All you had to do was get any single one of the guest characters from past Kirby games, except maybe the painter. And create 3 computer-controlled allies. And they would literally do your entire job for you. I wish I was kidding. I wish I was kidding. Even in bosses. Even in some of the late and final bosses. I experienced it for myself. I know what I'm talking about. Way too damn easy. Hell, you could create 3 computer-controllable allies from just the copy abilities. Bomb, fire, etc. I'm not going to go even further than that. I'm just saying. And mostly, it would still happen. It would still happen. Too easy. And then you got this shit with the missions in this game. Particularly some of the later ones, though more so the boss missions. More so the boss missions than anything else. But definitely some of the particular missions and some of the stages as well. Three of the boss missions are perfectly fine and reasonable. And there are 5. Just so you know. 5 missions to do, mostly, in most of the stages. I don't know if that's really the case or not, but I'm talking specifically about the boss missions, which I know for a fact there are 5. So when it comes to the boss missions, there are 5. 3 of them are easy. 3 of them are fine. Sometimes you have to do something specific in the boss fight. Sometimes you have to defeat the boss with a particular ability. Those are fine. Those are fine. It's the other 2. What are the other 2? One is a speedrunning one. You think I'm joking. Where you have to beat the boss within a certain amount of time. It's a speedrunning mission. The other is a no damage run, where you can't take any damage whatsoever against the boss. Are you kidding me right now? Really? That was your choice. Was it because of the complaints about Star Allies being too easy? So you went to the extreme opposite end. That's what you decided to do. Okay. Do you see my point now? And it wasn't even just the bosses. Some of the missions and some of the levels, and I don't remember them all. I remember one. Some of the missions and some of the levels were just as ridiculous. That took me multiple attempts to do. I can forgive that. Mostly. Though they shouldn't have been that ridiculous in the first place. They shouldn't have. One level. The bridge level. You have to face 2 mini-bosses at the same time and not take any damage against them just to rescue that particular Waddle Dee. Who came up with that? I want to know who thought that was a good idea. I really do. Because I would like to strangle them. Or at least smack them. Or at least have a few choice words for them that don't involve violence, I guess. That is overly ridiculous. I'm sorry. It is. It is. It's a skill issue. Cry me a river. It should not be this ridiculous. I'm sorry. It should not have that ridiculous amount of difficulty. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Speed running and no damage. This isn't Dark Souls. I'm sorry. Ridiculous. Ridiculous. And that shit, it ruined my experience. It did. It did. I'm sorry. I am not playing Kirby games to speed run. I am not playing Kirby games to beat shit without taking damage. I am not that good. I'm sorry. If you are that good, good for you. Should go touch grass, but good for you. Good for you. I'm not that good. So it ruined my experience. And I can't get past it. And I shouldn't be expected to get past it. That shit is overly ridiculous. Get it out. Get it out. I'm sorry. You didn't go through what I went through as I was trying to do that shit. Get it out. I don't want it. It's not needed. Get it out. I would have literally preferred the other shit from the other Kirby games. The collectibles that you need certain abilities for. As opposed to this shit. I'm not even joking. I'm not even joking. I would have preferred a collectible mechanic to get the Waddle Dees as opposed to this shit. Get it out. Overly ridiculous difficulty. And I shouldn't have to get a certain ability from post game either. Get it out. That is the one thing that ruined this game for me. I'm sorry. It did. In case you couldn't already tell, it did. It ruined my experience. It really, really did. Because it shouldn't have been that ridiculously difficult. I'm sorry. It just shouldn't have. And I was playing on the easiest difficulty too. Because there's no middle ground. There's easy and there's hard. That's it. There's no normal. So what difficulty did you think I was going to play it on? I'm not going to play it on hard. Get it out. They can't find a middle ground, clearly. I guess it's just something we're going to have to accept. They either make things too easy or too hard. They can't find a middle ground. They got a lot of complaints from Star Allies about it being too easy, deservedly so. And now they're going to get a lot of complaints about it being about the missions for the Waddle Dees, particularly the bosses, of being too hard, deservedly so. They can't find a middle ground, and I really wish they could and would, but clearly they can't. So this is just something we're going to have to accept at this point and hope that maybe eventually they can at least do something or find some way to not be, or to at least find some kind of middle ground. But let's be brutally honest, that's probably never going to happen. They can't find a middle ground. So these ridiculous-ass missions, these ridiculously difficult missions that was there to rescue the Waddle Dees should not have been this difficult. I'm sorry. I mean, the post game was difficult too, don't get me wrong, particularly the bosses. But at least that was doable. And I didn't have to do it multiple times. My God, imagine me praising post game as opposed to main game. The fuck timeline is this? I hope you get my point. I really do, and you probably do by now. Or at least I would hope you do. But the missions were just ridiculous. I'm sorry, they just were. Get it out. Find a middle ground. For the love of God, please find a middle ground. Because it ruined my experience with this game. It did. But just me. But you know, I'm the person who's shit. Absolutely, I'm the person who's shit. Sure. It's totally not, you know, the ridiculous difficulty of the missions. Absolutely not. All right. So there you go. That's the story of the game, the characters of the game, the world of the game, the graphics and the gameplay. Here's your obsession with the Metacritic score. Really good for the most part. But because of the because of my ruined experience, I don't remember what score I gave Legends Arceus, not that it really matters. I would say an 8 out of 10. And the reason it's not higher is because of my ruined experience. But that's just me. I would say this is probably more fair. Although I would say this is probably more fair than this. But for me personally, my score is an 8 out of 10. It would have been much higher if the missions to get the Waddle Dees weren't so ridiculous. If that wasn't the case, it would have been as high as a 9. Maybe even a little bit higher. But because of that, I can't bring myself to do it. I'm sorry, I just can't. So for me, it's an 8 out of 10. Now, there are a lot of people, or a majority of people from what I have seen, that call Kirby and the Forgotten Land the best Kirby game of the entire franchise. I am not going to sit here and state if that is how I feel one way or the other, just like I didn't state that with Pokemon Legends Arceus, because at the end of the day, it's subjective. You're going to get different answers from different people. It's all subjective at the end of the day. And everyone is going to feel a different way about it. Now, in that weird metaphor or weird scenario where you force me to choose, the gun to the head's metaphor, whatever other type of similar metaphor you want to use, if I was forced to say yes or no on if Kirby and the Forgotten Land is the best Kirby game of the franchise, I would say yes, but only because of the graphics and the gameplay. But it was too bogged down for me personally on the ridiculous difficulty of some of the missions to rescue the Waddle Dees, particularly the boss missions. So is it the best Kirby game of the franchise? Sure. I just can't sit here and definitively say that because it's all subjective at the end of the day. It is. It probably is the best Kirby game I've ever played. But I just can't really bring myself to give it a higher score than an 8 because of the ridiculous difficulty of the Waddle Dee rescue missions. Because of the speed running and the no damage stuff. That's ridiculous. Get it out. I'm sorry. But that's just me. There was hope, wasn't there? You were hoping this would overcome it, weren't you? I can't blame you. I was kind of hoping it would overcome it too. But I can't sit here and say it has confidently. That would be me lying. There are still other things to be played. We'll see what happens in December. It did not overcome it. I'm sorry. I'm playing the PlayStation 3 in 2024. Oh, God. And it's actually more than this. It's the other one, too. Thieves in Time. I am playing the entire Sly Cooper franchise next on the PlayStation 3. I know that sounds bad, but considering most of the games are short, it may not be that bad. But it will still can take a considerable amount of time. I'm not going to make a video on every single one of the Sly games. That's not going to happen. I'll make a video on the franchise in general. I'm not going to rank the franchise like I did with Tales of. But this is the compromise. So next for me is the Sly Cooper franchise on the PlayStation 3. I know the first game is on PlayStation 5 now, but the rest of the games aren't, so I might as well just play it on PlayStation 3. Every single one of them. The original trilogy and the fourth game, Thieves in Time. I don't care how bad people say Thieves in Time is. I will judge everything for myself, which is always what I do anyway. But that is what is next for me. We'll see if this really is as good as people say. It probably is. It'll probably make me want a new Sly Cooper game as well. But I will give love when love is needed and desperately deserved. So I will experience it for myself, and we'll see what happens. But that is what is up next, the Sly Cooper franchise. In order. This one, then this one, then this one, and then Thieves in Time. So that's what's next for me. It is September, so gaming stuff should pick up, though it will more so happen towards the second half of the month as opposed to the first half. But if anything happens, depending on what it is and if I care enough to, maybe I'll make a video or maybe I won't. It's going to depend on the situation. So we'll see in that regards. But things are going to at least pick up slightly. Maybe. We'll see. But that's all I got for you. I've gone too long again, but I had to call out the ridiculous difficulty of the Waddle Dee missions and the bosses in some of the stages, so it bogged my experience down too much. I'm sorry, it just did. And it ruined my experience too much. But that's just me. And it didn't overcome the other one. It didn't. Sorry. I wish it would have. Trust me, I do. For multiple reasons that are both selfish and biased. I'm not going to deny that. But the game is extremely good. It is. And it is potentially the best Kirby game ever made. It is. They just shouldn't have made those Waddle Dee missions ridiculously difficult. And it ruined my experience. But that's just me. That's just me. Say whatever you want. Be a mental 5-year-old as much as you want. Skill issue. Whatever. I shouldn't have to get something from post-game either. Just saying. Just saying. But it just, for me personally, ruined my experience and they can't find a middle ground. That's what bogged this game down. And that's what stopped it from overcoming the thing that everyone seems to think, including myself, it should have overcame. Oh well, I guess. Oh well, I guess. This is Mega Champ saying next time I'll be providing you with more unlimited guidance. See ya when I see ya. Bye.